Feel guilty for resting? We live in a culture that celebrates industriousness and shames sloth. But what if taking time out was actually necessary for productivity, creativity, and much more? The story of the ant and the grasshopper has been used to shame laziness for centuries. But this is really a tale about balance. Let's break it down. One summer, when the sun shone bright and the world buzzed with warmth, a carefree grasshopper hopped about the meadow. He chirped his songs, leapt joyfully from blade to blade, and basked in the beauty of life. Near him, he noticed a group of ants busy at work. They toiled tirelessly, carrying crumbs and seeds far bigger than their own bodies, back to their nest. "Why do you work so hard?" Grasshopper called out to one of them, pausing in his song. "The weather is perfect. Come, enjoy the sunshine and sing with me." The ant glanced at him but barely stopped. "We're preparing for winter," it replied. "You should do the same. When the cold comes, there will be no food and singing won't fill your belly." "Winter is far away," laughed Grasshopper. "I have plenty of time, and this glorious sunshine is too good to waste." But Ant and the rest of its troop marched on undeterred, their trails winding toward a well-stocked anthill. Grasshopper, ignoring their warning, simply snorted and continued his carefree life, singing and dancing through the whole of summer. But then, as it always does, winter arrived. The meadow turned white with frost. The leaves withered, and the once abundant food disappeared. Grasshopper, cold and hungry, searched desperately for something to eat until he stumbled upon the ants' home, warm and glowing, bursting at the edges with stored provisions. He knocked at their door and begged, "Please, dear ant, may I have some food? I'm starving and so very cold." Ant peered out at him. "We warned you," he said. "There isn't enough here to share. You must learn to plan ahead, my friend." And with that, it retreated into its cosy little world, leaving Grasshopper to face the winter alone. Poor, stupid, irresponsible Grasshopper. My name's Hazel Gale. I'm a former therapist turned author and creator of the Betwixt app, and I'm delving into the fascinating wisdom to be taken from myth, fairy tales, and other forms of story, especially when viewed through the lens of Jungian psychology. In this series, we're breaking down, reframing, understanding, and occasionally debunking the 7 deadly sins. Today, in case you hadn't guessed, sloth. As one of the 7 deadly sins, sloth is probably the hardest to define. It refers to a range of different traits according to who you're listening to. The word sloth comes from the Latin term acedia, meaning without care. It was originally used to describe an affliction to monks who became indifferent to their religious duties and obligations to God. These days, sloth is most commonly used to describe laziness and inertia, and as such is hugely stigmatised in our success-hungry culture. Seen through a more accepting and, in my opinion, realistic lens, though, sloth can obviously be seen first as a response to the fundamental need for rest and recuperation. But it can also be understood as downtime that must and will always come after acts of great determination, i.e. anything that stimulates an abundance of dopamine. Have you ever looked forward to the end of one project so you can get going on that other project, only to find that as soon as challenge number 1 is out of the way, you could do nothing but veg out in front of the TV for an entire week? That's what's going on there. Dopamine spikes are followed by crashes. The bigger the spike, the bigger the dip. And with super low dopamine, we simply cannot feel motivated enough to get moving. It's not a choice, it's a neurological certainty. But this isn't a bad thing. While these crashes might feel horribly unproductive, important stuff is going on in the background. First, we need downtime following either a big achievement or failure if we're going to process and integrate these things. Something like a success doesn't just sink in the moment we achieve it. It takes a little time. Second, without the lows, we can't get the highs, meaning that the dopamine roller coaster keeps us more productive and motivated over time than if we tried to stay in an up state constantly. Finally, and most interestingly, while high dopamine drives goal-directed focus, when levels drop, the brain gets to shift into a more diffuse, open-ended mode of thinking. This is when we experience insight-based creativity, where connections form between seemingly unrelated ideas, giving us those precious aha moments that can bring all sorts of things together. In short, no one can be on all the time, and nobody wants to either. However, even though most of us can grasp this intellectually, we still judge ourselves for moments of lethargy, or for turning down work or invites to social events due to a learned shame around slothfulness. So, as with all the quote-unquote sins we've explored in this series, there's an interesting contradiction here. In Jungian terms, sloth is polarizing. We struggle to see the middle ground, and therefore have a hard time accepting both our own lethargy and whatever and whoever else we see as lazy. The reality, though, is that it's the polarization that actually poses the threat. Let's break down the fable of the ant and the grasshopper to see what can be done about this. This tale embodies the archetypal tension between the puer aeternus, the eternal child represented by Grasshopper, and the senex, the wise elder represented by Ant. Grasshopper's carefree nature aligns with the child's desire to remain in a state of eternal play and freedom, while Ant symbolises discipline, responsibility, and foresight. Read literally, the story warns of the dangers of irresponsibility and sloth. We're supposed to side with Ant, it seems, and learn the virtues of hard work and orderly preparation. From a Jungian perspective, though, the story can be read as a caution against an unbalanced psyche. No archetype is superior or more correct than any other. They are simply different forms of natural psychic energy. So while Grasshopper's failure lies in its inability to integrate the wisdom of the senex, Ant may represent an overemphasis on duty and lack of joy. Neither has it right. Grasshopper suffers in the winter, but Ant suffers in the summer. Or to put that another way, the carefree Grasshopper neglects the future, while the future-focused ants fail to experience the present. In that case, this tale depicts a fractured, unintegrated psyche, one that hasn't yet found a solution for its inner conflict, which feels familiar because we're still polarised in exactly this way as a society today. So how do we find a balance? A healthy psyche would incorporate the senex's wisdom, structure and foresight without losing the puer's creativity, playfulness and openness to new possibilities. That's the Holy Grail. And this leads us to another way to interpret this fable. Rather than two warring and irreconcilable opposites, what if this story depicts the journey to integration, along with the pain and discomfort required to achieve this? Jungian psychologist Marie-Louise von Franz devoted her life's work to analysis of fairy tales and folklore. I haven't been able to find any writing of hers on this particular story, but based on her work in general, we might expect her analysis of the story to go something like this. Grasshopper is a symbol of the immature psyche, one that avoids responsibility and remains fixed in the moment, refusing to engage with the future or with reality. The ants, on the other hand, represent the collective wisdom of the unconscious, which is urging the grasshopper towards transformation. When Grasshopper fails to listen, he suffers during the long cold winter. But rather than seeing this as a punishment, perhaps this suffering is a necessary step towards maturity. We don't get to grow without growing pains. And psychological integration is inherently difficult because it requires the death of our old way of being and the traumatic birth of a new self. So how can we apply any of this, and what does it mean about the sinfulness of sloth? Let's start with the cause of sloth in terms of neurology and psychology. First of all, let's bust a damaging myth. You may have heard of the quote-unquote couch potato gene, a single gene supposedly associated with slothfulness, which took the world by storm when it first made the headlines. According to geneticist Adam Rutherford, the couch potato gene is a load of old nonsense. It's just not that simple, he says. No single gene can be isolated and determine the cause of a behaviour like this. So what does cause our slothful moments? As mentioned, there's the simple fundamental need for rest. Our bodies, including our brains, need to rest in order to work properly. Sometimes, though, we may appear lazy because we're anxious or overthinking, aka analysis paralysis. In these instances, we'll find ourselves frozen in place by strong emotions, not a conscious decision to shirk responsibilities. Depression creates inertia too, of course, which is also out of our conscious control. But this is where we get to the juicy stuff. What if I told you that where we position ourselves on the social hierarchy has a hand in all of this? What we see as our comparative level of status corresponds directly with the dopamine receptors in the brain's reward network. So, the higher up we see ourselves on the societal ladder of success and worth, the more motivated we will be to get up and do stuff. If we perceive ourselves as worthless, as poor or inferior in some other way, then we'll find it much, much harder to rise up and out of our state of inertia. It's not just a case of gritting our teeth. Take dopamine away and we will be physically, neurologically incapable of motivating ourselves to try. This is what poverty and shame does to the brain. So it's quite clearly unhelpful to label slothfulness or its counterpart, rigid industriousness, as sinful. We all have the potential to tend towards either end of this continuum, and, as discussed, neither can be seen as superior to the other. According to neuroscientist and clinical psychologist Professor Ian Robertson, there are ways to override our natural slovenly inclinations. One is to foster a sense of control in life. Robertson calls this a psychological antidote to the corrosive effects of disempowerment. Another is to foster a feeling of confidence. If you can train yourself to believe that you can do something, then the brain registers this as a future success and increases dopaminergic activity. Dopamine, by the way, is a natural antidepressant and anti-anxiety drug. as well as the driver of motivation and even frontal lobe activity, which essentially makes us that little bit smarter than we were while overcome by lethargy. But how do we create confidence and a sense of control in life? Well, there's no magic wand, but one fairly universal rule is that we'll feel stronger and more connected to ourselves when we focus less on external forces or restrictions and more on what we can control: our choices, our behaviours, our responses to the world. We need to focus on what we value, rather than what the world values or doesn't value about us. We also need to look away whenever we can from the big picture of our futures, which can be so daunting and paralysing, and instead focus on the small steps we can take right now. Obviously, it's hard to take action when completely overcome by lethargy, but very few of us will be in that state all the time, and movement at any point can count. The first step towards any goal, no matter how tiny, creates a new perspective. You meet and perceive new things, you gain new resources, and crucially, you can start to see yourself differently. Anyone else feel like a different person just because they made their bed in the morning? That's how small these steps can be to start building the sense of confidence and control that can fuel the activity cycle in a positive way. But before you do all of that, remember that the Senex's counterpart is also vital for psychological harmony, the puer. If we adopt the wisdom of ants and live that way, we may get a lot done, but we're also likely to march our way into burnout, isolation, depression, meaninglessness, physical illness, and more. We struggle to slow down in this world precisely because we have branded sloth as a sin. And as a result, we not only risk our health, but also our joy, peace, connection, and play. We need to be grasshopper sometimes too. So how do we achieve this wonderful balance? How do we integrate our inner grasshopper and ant? First, we need to recognize that life is a dance between opposites. You can be both serious and playful, wise and curious, disciplined and spontaneous. This means that there are ways to combine qualities from both archetypes. For example, you could plan a creative project, Senex, and execute it with joyful enthusiasm, puer. Similarly, you could schedule time, Senex, for spontaneity, play, and daydreaming, puer. You can also cultivate the ability to set and respect your boundaries, Senex, while using them to protect time and space for creativity, improvisation, and connection with others, puer. The battle between grasshopper and ant is not solved by an either-or, but a both-and. There are times in life to embrace the carefree energy of the puer and times to embody the grounded wisdom of the Senex. Harmony comes from knowing when to shift between these roles.